Okay, so Frederick was, he was a 20-year-old pilot, and on the 21st of October 1978 he went missing and hasn't been seen since. He was on a return flight from King Island, which isn't very far away from the mainland, and he disappeared over Bass Strait without any trace of any description. This here is a current photo of Frederick Valentich's parents' house where Guido used to live. This has an extension on the top that I don't believe was there at the time. We weren't able to get an old photo, but that's what his house looks like today. He was very passionate about what he did and wanted to become a commercial pilot. That was his ultimate aim, and he was getting close to achieving that. He also was an Air Force cadet. I don't know a lot of people that know this, but in his younger years, and I mean like, 18, 19, he went and did some training down at the sail base in Gippsland. He was there for a couple of weeks. So what I'm going to do is go run through a different style here of what you've probably ever heard before. I'm tackling it from a different way. Everybody's seen the Unexplained Mysteries video showing the plane disappearing and so forth. So a lot of us have seen that. I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of us have. I'm going to run through the actual day, from day one, right from the beginning, in the morning when the sun came up, till we got in the plane. And then we're going to look at the actual search, but not the air search. We're going to look at the marine search, where we've just recently received a lot of information from the National Archives, never been seen before. So we've got some information on that for you too. So the sun came up that morning. It was 6:05 in the morning, and it was a reasonably nice day. It wasn't raining or anything like that. It was a calm day. Fred got up at 7:15. He went and had a shower, got dressed, came down to the breakfast table and was there by about 8 o'clock. Sat and had breakfast with his father and his mother. And he was always interested in UFOs before any of this happened. It was just a subject he was really interested in. And he used to keep a scrapbook. So he cut out newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, and put them into this book, and occasionally go through and read them to himself. So I guess it was like a bit of a hobby for him at the time. So he'd sit there at the morning breakfast table, read through that. He was asked by the officers of the Victorian barracks if he would fly over to King Island, pick up some crayfish, because they planned to have a dinner that night with all the officers at 10 o'clock at night. He knew them because he'd been down to the sail base, and that's where he made the connection, and that's why they asked him, because they knew that he could fly over there for them. So that was the plan. So he decided to do that for them, and try and pick up these crayfish, bring them back same day, and so they could have their dinner that night. As I said before, he attended the RAAF base in Sale. But when he came back from there, he was actually more interested in UFOs than he'd ever been before. We don't know why that is, and no one's ever really been able to get to the bottom of it, but we do know that he was more interested than ever before. It was now 8:30 in the morning, and he decided that he was going to leave home and go to work. Now, this is a Saturday morning, and it's going back to 1978. Now, on Saturdays, the shops closed at 12 o'clock. They weren't allowed to open in the afternoons. So he went to work, and it was 8:30, and he had to travel to Moonee Ponds, which isn't too far. It's only about a 10-15 minute drive from where he lives. So he left Avondale Heights, which is the house I showed you before, and then he arrived at this hardware store. Now, the hardware store sold things like army disposal stores. They used to sell a lot of that sort of stuff as well. So that's where he went, and he got there at 9 o'clock to go to work. Throughout the morning, he tossed around the idea of what he was about to do that day. First flight over water at night. He'd never tackled that before. And so he kept tossing that around in his head all morning while he was doing his job. And that was noted by his boss. Can't think of his last name. His first name was Dick. And he noted the fact that he was a bit not quite on his game with what he was doing with work, and he tended to think a lot about where he had to go, what he had to do, landing lights and so forth. Come midday, the shop closed, and then he headed straight to Moorabbin Airport. And then once he got there, he pulled up into the car park He sat in the car park. He was pretty much alone. There was really nobody else around. He had a course that he was doing to attain this commercial vehicles licence, and so he sat there in the car because he was a bit early. He sat there to do a bit of studying and so forth. At 1:30 his course began, after arriving there at 12:35, and at 5 o'clock he'd finished doing the course. There was several people in the course, not a lot, there was a few, 8, 9 people. And once he'd left there, he went straight across to the briefing office. Now this is all at Moorabbin Airport, so he was doing some of this training there. He went straight across. Now this is where you're going to get very interesting. I want you to probably take really good note of the time framing here. 5 o'clock he walked across and he went straight through to the briefing office and submitted his flight plan. He submitted his flight plan. His takeoff time at the time was 5:45. We all know that he didn't leave at 5:45. He left at a much later time. We'll get to that in a minute. Around 5:35, after submitting his flight plan, he took off to a shop which sold takeaway food, and he did that to get some dinner before he left on the plane. And at 6:10, Tyson's refuelling plant filled the plane, so it was ready for the flight. And then at 6:19, Fred did take off, not at 5:45. Now there's something that's come up in the last week that I would like to mention to you. I want you to think about it, and if you've got any questions later, I'm quite happy to answer them. We've been in contact very, very recently in the last week by the man who was the maintenance man of that aircraft. He handed Fred the keys after he'd done the maintenance on it, and he believes that the rear seats were removed from that aircraft and replaced with crates. And he believes that Fred did that without any authorisation. And to be quite honest, if that is the case, that can upset the plane as far as balance. People do it. They do it for a lot of reasons, because they need to travel further, so they need more fuel. It makes the plane lighter, but it's done in a professional way, not by Fred taking it into a hangar and removing seats just before a flight. Now this is what we've been told, and this is what the maintenance engineer believes happened. I have no facts to back it. I'm just presenting it as I've heard it. So that's an interesting thing. So between 5:35 and 6:19, did he buy takeaway, or did he go and take the plane into a hangar and remove the seats? Around 6:27 that particular night, Fred passed over Frankston, Victoria, which is some 15, 20 minutes away from the airport by aircraft. It's not even that, it's a bit less than that by plane. It's not far away from Moorabbin Airport, let's put it that way. It's along the coastal route. From there he veered right and headed out across the Port Phillip Bay. And then Fred kept continuing on his trip until he ended up unfortunately in ufology history. As we know, he's now vanished and disappeared for good. So that's the general run of what happened up until the time he disappeared. We're about to release episode 10, which will have a full CGI movie of the actual flight. It has been done as close as it can be possibly done to what really happened, with the help of Dr. Richard Haynes and his book. We've worked through that. We've worked through various combinations of people that we've spoken to. The dialogue you'll hear in that particular CGI movie is as we know it, and it's not dramatised in any way by throwing in anything that's false. So we hope that to be out the next 2 to 3 weeks on episode 10, so please look out for that. Now a little bit about the aircraft. The aircraft was just a normal 182 Cessna, but it had long-range tanks on it, which meant it could travel much further than a normal Cessna of that particular type. It took anything up to 300 litres of fuel, and when it was filled at 79.23 gallons, which is just under that 300 level. The plane was built in 1967, and the serial number you can see there. So those long-range tanks were fitted to this particular plane, but it was his favourite plane, and I'll get to that in a minute why. Previously, the plane was used for skydiving at another airport not too far away called Valentich, and that was done in the early 70s, around 71, 72, 73. A lot of people used this plane for skydiving at the time. It was then moved out to Moorabbin Airport after a period of time once they had decided to take it there. It was always a well-maintained aircraft from the people that we've interviewed from Moorabbin Airport, and it was definitely one of Fred's favourites. So he had taken this plane up many a time and understood it back to front. He was very familiar with it. The weather on the day was very clear, the skies were clear. You can see two towers here. The reason there's two towers, this is the older tower, this is the newer tower. This would have been taken down in about 6 to 8 months after this picture had been taken. And then they operated with this one until the current one, which has been now put in place. On that particular day, there's very few clouds about. There was a very slight breeze. The plane was well maintained for flight, and he'd flown it many times. There was no reason why there should have been a problem. This picture here is Dr. Richard Haynes's picture of the flight path. I'll try and do with this with the mouse, but as you can see, he's flown in from, if you can imagine up here, you've got Moorabbin Airport, Frankston over here, coming down this way, travelling along the coastal range here, and then zipping round here. Sorry, but this is a bit hard with the mouse. King Island's down here. In Richard Haynes's map, he's got him turning around and going back and then doing this round and round thing, which is what Fred said he was hovering at the time with the aircraft above him. Richard Haynes seems to think, from what we can figure out, is that he's gone back towards the coast and inwards. Whether you believe what this story tells us or not, I don't know. It's a bit hard to really get serious evidence to back anything on all this other than what we see. So the search, we'll move very quickly through the search here. Now we're talking about the sea search, we're not talking about any air search, even though you do see an aeroplane there, that is obviously part of it. But predominantly we did receive some documents that thick just recently, and we've breezed through them to try and give you some information on that tonight. Okay, so the Orion aircraft was deployed at the time and made a sweep of Bass Strait when we first heard that Fred had gone missing. On the Sunday, there were 3 marine craft which were cray fishermen, which are these guys here. This is the name of their ships, and they went out for the day. They went out for 5:30 to 6:30 at night. Clearly didn't find a thing, so there's that. And then also, these buildings here are no longer around. As you can see, they've got towers and so forth. They're radio stations, basically. So after the disappearance of the distress phase was announced, a message was passed to VIM from Airways Melbourne. Airways Operations. Airways Operations was what we know today as Tullamarine Airport or Melbourne Airport. And they have a section there which looks after special air and search, rescue, that sort of thing. Melbourne Radio, which is called VIM, so VIM, was based out at Cape Schanck, and this is the building here. It provides the safety services via radio for the whole of Bass Strait and the Tasmanian coastal waters area. VIM contacted a ship called the Nancy Heath. Now, this is just after the disappearance went through and the message came out that Fred had disappeared. Here's one of the documents, and believe me, there's 250 odd pages of this, just to give you an idea how many documents there are. A lot of them you can't read, a lot of them are what they call telexes, and for those who are too young to understand what a telex is, as the prelude to having email, I guess. In the olden days, like a big typewriter, type your message and it would go through, come out the other end, wherever you send it to. So there's a lot of those, but there are a lot of those unreadable. They faded over time. However, we were able to get some information from some of them. Here's the radio operator at the time. This is the chap here. So he was sitting there when the message came in, and a message was broadcast into the area to try and find out if there was any ships around that could help out to see where Fred had gone. There was 8 ships that answered the call. 4 of them were released automatically because they were too far from the scene. 4 were asked to go and check it out. The Nancy Heath was the closest at the time and was within striking range to check the information to see what was happening, whether they could find him or not. The Nancy Heath, this ship was the nearest vessel to the estimated disappearance on the night of the 21st. The vessel was asked to proceed down the aircraft's intended track to 5 miles from Cape Wickham Lighthouse, and you can see Cape Wickham Lighthouse there. If nothing was found, then it was just to resume normal course, and that's exactly what happened. So they didn't find it. So that's the Nancy Heath down the bottom there. That's where Cape Wickham Lighthouse is, and Fred would have come in across this way. So, Department of Transport records. Once you start delving down that rabbit hole, you never know what you're going to find. Commonly known at the time as the SOCOMML, now YMML, which stands for, it's the abbreviation or the term that they use for Melbourne Airport. They had changed it. It used to be Australian Melbourne something or other, but they've changed that now to a Y, and they've done that across the board around Australia. Back in the 70s, it used to be A for Australia. But then they became connected with the worldwide link or network with these particular style of call signs, and to fit in, they had to change it to a Y. So that's how that came about. Anyway, moving right along here, the Special Operations Centre, which is this piece, Melbourne Airport, asked ACSC, which is the Australian Coastal Surveillance Centre, to work out all the conditions around the northern tip of King Island. ACSC normally only do the current drift, so only you ever look at, this guy's here, Coastal Surveillance, only look at the water conditions. They're not involved in looking at the air conditions, but they were asked by Special Operations Centre Melbourne Airport to do that. A lot of confusion went on. Due to the confusion, the Special Operations Group decided to provide the entire thing. And they thought, these guys here, Special Operations, thought that the Australian Coastal Surveillance Group had a computer that could do all that. So it just goes to show how you've got 2 government departments who don't understand or know what each other's are doing or what capacity they have available to them to do a search. So that's what came out of that. There was an investigation done at a later stage to establish what had happened. It wasn't common procedure at all. SOC requested local fishermen around the area to report any sightings or hearing reports that they may have received. King Island crayfisherman Mr. Graham John Oliver advised all the fishing boats had left the subject area the day before. Special Operations Centre suspended the transmission overnight till the next day, and they did that quite regularly. So once it got to midnight, turn it off, turn it back on in the morning about 6 o'clock. That was a common thing when they were trying to do an air and sea rescue search. So on the 21st of October, 20 hours, 14 minutes and 18 seconds, Special Operations Centre revised the estimated splashdown point as 22 miles. So 22 miles off from the initial thought of where Fred had gone into the sea. That's a long way. We don't know why that happened, but that's exactly what happened. They came up with a different area. The thing is that new location that they came up with was much closer to the Victorian coastline than ever thought before. So they contacted the Victoria Police, which was the D24 division at the time, and they in turn advised the fishing co-op, as it was known at the time. So all fishing vehicles around the coastal line of Victoria could be on the lookout for Fred. So there's a lot of indications to, Fred must have headed back towards the mainland. But, having said that, we just don't know because we don't really have that evidence. So the search in the first 3 days, day 1, okay, there was 3 sorties along the same track that Fred Valentich took on VHDSJ. There was 1 ship that tracked through the area, which was the Nancy Heath we mentioned before. And King Island Police checked for unusual sightings and hearing reports. There was no reports ever found on King Island from the police there. Day 2, there was one aircraft that carried out land and sea of King Island. Another aircraft went along the coastal route. The RAAF Orion carried out detailed search of the possible maritime area, and 3 vessels searched the west coast of the island of King Island. There was also an oil slick that was detected at the time. On day 3, there was 2 civil aircraft. One was a Nomad, the other one was an Orion. They did another sweep to see what they could find. They had noted that the Nomad had investigated the fact that it had seen these oil slicks. The Nomad confirmed that debris was not actually from the aircraft at all, and there was oil slicks taken on board one of the marine crafts for analysis, which turned out to be supposedly not from an aircraft. The final 2 days, day 4, day 5, and we're only talking marine search here. A SERPIC was issued finally on the Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, a SERPIC is something they drop in the water. It detects where there are other vehicles or vessels. And that was used throughout the day on the Tuesday, and on the Wednesday that was their final opportunity to try and do a search. However, at 9 o'clock that morning, after a meeting, they decided to terminate the marine search. The marine search for Frederick Valentich officially lasted 5 days, but the air search went on for several weeks. The research for this, data for this presentation was discovered in the National Archives, not previously released or found by VUFOA, and the Melbourne episode, which is the book written by Dr. Richard Haynes, we've been through, George and I have been through that dozens of times, that book, trying to establish this, that and the other, what's right, what's wrong, what's made up, what's not. So that was the research for that. Finally, on Fred Valentich, he was a normal guy in a very abnormal circumstance. Unfortunately gone for good. Just a couple of footnotes, that's his girlfriend there, Rhonda Rushton. She now lives in Queensland somewhere. We are trying to contact her for an interview. That hasn't happened yet. She apparently had not flown on that flight, and that was the only flight she ever didn't go on with Fred, which is very interesting. This over here is Special Operations Centre out at Moorabbin Airport. This is Fred when he was young, and this is his mother, Alberta. And that's Fred Valentich.